Welcome back. You're still watching SA Today. Now, whilst cities across the world are seen as key economic drivers in their countries, they're also marred by violence and crime. South Africa is no exception, with the country's largest cities carrying a disproportionate burden of crimes such as murder. Cape Town tops the list with the highest murder rate in the country, and that's according to the 2018-2019 State of Urban Safety in South Africa report compiled by the South African Cities Network. Now, the report uses national statistics and other data to try and tell the story of urban crime. To give us some insights about that story, we're now joined in studio by Siphelele Ngobese, who's a SA Cities Network Inclusive and Wellbeing Researcher. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
All right, so reports like yours very, very important because there's an idea of what's going on the ground and perhaps gives us a clue in the kind of strategies that are required to combat crime. First of all, let's start with the reporting gap between police statistics and what might be contained in your report. How does it happen, and how do you compile what you think is a clearer picture of what's happening on the ground?
Okay, so I think you very aptly said that we aggregate or take from national data to then tell the story of what's happening at the local level. So in terms of a reporting gap, ours was in direct response to the lack of place-specific and local level understanding of the drivers of crime, because it's one thing to have a sense of what's going on, what kinds of crimes are there, but it's quite another to then drill down to understand why some of those dynamics might be in place. And so what we were finding is that the drivers are different in different cities, and so that's important for then crafting the right responses, because you have a general problem of violence and crime in the country, but from place to place the drivers and dynamics
so what you're saying is that the drivers in Soweto are different from the drivers in Sandton?
Of course. So the drivers in Soweto are different to the drivers in a place like Hillbrow. So for example, you mentioned that Cape Town accounts for quite a large chunk of the murders that we've seen in the country. And what we were finding there is that one of the key drivers is access to firearms, access to alcohol, and so on. In a city like Johannesburg, what we're finding is that one of the key drivers is quite different. Here, it's more issues related to rapid urbanization, migration factors, family disruption factors, and so on. And so by city and city, you see different drivers, and so you need to respond to those. And what policy previously has done is that sometimes you have kind of a blanket approach to everything, and that hasn't proved as sustainable.
So that blanket approach is what I was going to ask you, is that one tends to see police responses very similar everywhere, that they'll deploy this, they'll deploy that, but actually you need, I suppose, specific response for specific problems. That's
right. So I think I was able to catch some of the very spirited discussions that were happening around gangsterism. And so I think another case that we make and something that we try to stress is that you tend to have this policing-based or law enforcement-based response to any and everything. And what we are finding and what we're seeing is that they're also social drivers of crime, they're also economic drivers of crime. And so you need also longer-term approaches, you need social approaches, you need approaches that speak to the built environment of a place. So in a place where gangsterism might be an issue, you might want to find out what the family disruption dynamics are there, and so on.
So if I'm reading you correctly, what you're almost saying is that, you know, when you are responding to crime, you should have various departments working together, social development, working with the police, perhaps working with health even.
Correct. And so we've said, like, particularly at the local level, that there's a role player for the urban planner in terms of how they plan spaces, because a space can either give to crime or create an environment where a criminal feels that it's conducive for them to do what they do, or it can be the very thing that discourages criminal activity. So there's a role for urban planning and the built, how we configure the built environment as well, social development, economic development, and so on.
And I suppose that's part of the sort of heritage of apartheid, the spatial segregation that was created. We're seeing some of the fruits of that even now.
Yes, and how it recreates itself. So we have to engage with how do these configurations, how does the spatial, the apartheid spatial pattern continue to propagate itself in a democratic setting, and what does that say about our systems and how they're thinking and acting and so on. So there are responses to happen at a policy level, at a system level, at a day-to-day practice level that should feed our thinking and responses.
One of our guests earlier on said that gangsterism is everywhere. Is that what you've observed, or is this again area specific, and what would be the drivers if they are peculiar to certain areas?
Okay, so I wouldn't say it's something that is general to South African cities. In the cities that we analyze in our report, the two cities that come up with dynamics that kind of mirror each other in terms of gangsterism would have been Nelson Mandela Bay, otherwise known as Port Elizabeth, and then in Cape Town we're seeing that city is quite challenged with gangsterism. Similarly, across the country, I'm sure in Johannesburg as well. So we saw guests coming from Westbury who are saying that they have these dynamics of gangsterism. I wouldn't say it's something that's general, but it's something of great concern, because in those places where we are seeing a lot of gangsterism, those are the places that account for a lot of the deadly violence that we see.
What are the drivers for gangsterism from what you've seen?
So again, it's quite different. So in Cape Town, just based on the research done by our partners at the University of Cape Town's Center for Criminology, you are finding that the gangsterism is tied to transnational crime. It's tied to what you see happening in terms of the flow of illicit arms. So it ties to a more global kind of network of criminal activity. Also, there are social dynamics involved. I would stress the point of family disruption, issues of unemployment, and inequality and deprivation. And just in terms of just the social dynamics of our society in South Africa. It does
seem like this is a report that perhaps should be available not just to law enforcement authorities, but us as citizens as well, to get a sense of what's happening around ourselves. And maybe we can get involved in some interventions. How does one get hold of this report? Is it free? Is it available?
Yes, so all our products at SACN are open source, available to anyone who might want to access them. There are, of course, issues of accessibility. Not everybody has access to the internet. Not everybody can get hold. So we try by all means to package them so that they can be accessible to other people. But they are available online. Please visit our website, sacities.net, and also saferspaces.org.za.
Siphelele, thanks so much indeed for coming through, and the great work that you're doing with your network. I think it's quite important that we get a good understanding of what's going on. Hopefully we can intervene and do something. Thanks so much indeed.
Thanks so much, Peter.